Good morning, gang. Neil here. And you know it's morning here in Pennsylvania, not because of the light coming in through my blinds in the back, but because I have a few extra bags under my eyes. So it took me a while to get to this point filming, and now I'm raring to go, so I thought I would come in the studio today and knock out another video. So we left off with the application of the painting procedure and certain theories of form, right? The, what is that thing called? Law of transition. And the three approaches to describing form, right? We applied those to the sphere and then to the bowling pin, because the bowling pin is a more complicated sphere, right? It's a combination of volumes. And of course, all of you might be out there thinking, oh yes, but I've painted bowling pins and spheres. How does this fancy procedure of yours apply to something more complicated? Well, that's what we'll do today. We will apply the painting procedure and all of those fancy principles that we've been going over to something a little more complicated, that being a cast, right? A sculpture. So, without further ado, we will switch cameras and off we go. Now, as usual, I always show the palette. Repetition is the mother of skill, right? Just as a reminder, we have our 11 values set out. 10 being white, 0 being black, and 9 grays in between. And just as a reminder, this is not just ivory black and white. This is our neutral black. Our neutral black is a combination of raw umber and ivory black. 2 parts ivory black to 1 part raw umber. Why do we add the raw umber? Because the raw umber neutralizes the bluishness of the ivory black, giving us a series of grays that don't have a warm bias or a cool bias. And again, for the monochrome painting, that really doesn't make much of a difference, but as we go into color, then it makes a big difference having a set of grays that don't have a color bias towards warm or cool. So we have our palette laid out. I have my value scale somewhere around here. Oh, always the value scale, handy dandy value scale ready. Brushes, medium, spirits, all that good stuff ready to go. Isolation cards handy for checking values, and away we go. So we have the cast in front of us, right? The cast, it's one of the David features, it's the mouth. I have my drawing already indicated, and again, just as a reminder, for painting purposes, when it comes to drawing, the least amount of information that I need to get me painting, I need to put in my optical boundaries, which are the outside edges where the form turns away from the line of sight, and my shadow boundaries, right, where light and shadow divide. I can't get away with anything less than that. That's the least amount of information that I need to get my painting rolling. And just as a reminder, as we start, right, principles to keep in mind. We have the law of transition, also called the rule of 3. It takes a minimum of 3 value changes, no matter how slight, to create a gradation. Making something look realistic on a 2-dimensional surface absolutely requires that you are masterful or control your gradations from light to dark, or you will not create form, period. End of sentence. If you want to throw paint around and you don't care about making something look 3-dimensional, then you can take that law of transition and throw it right into the garbage can. But if you want to paint in a representational manner and make a flat surface look 3-dimensional, you must adhere to the rule of 3. Done. And it's not a matter of adhering to it overall, but in the light mass, you need at least 3 value changes. In the shadow mass, you need at least 3 value changes. And you need a halftone, a linking value that bridges light and shadow. That leads us right into our 3 approaches to describing form: spatial, nomenclatural, and tonal. And I don't think I mentioned this in one of the other videos, but one of my students came up with the idea of SNOT. S-N-T, SNOT. Just to remember the spatial, nomenclatural, and tonal. So, starting first spatially, right? Just taking a second to analyze what's in front of me with the cast. Very simple cast. Spatial, front, top, under, side left, side right. So in this situation again, the light's in the same position that it's been in for all the other projects. It is to my left, above, and out in the front a little bit of the cast. The spatial description of form is expressed in planar orientations toward and away from where I'm sitting. So we have, again, front, top, under, side right, side left. So where the light is situated here, and from where I'm sitting, it is the front, top, side left planes that are getting hit the most. The under, side right that are completely in shadow, and the frontal planes, front, top, front, under, front, side left, front, side right. The frontal planes are where the majority of gradations in my light are occurring, in my light mass. So I've now taken a moment to think about this in spatial terms. That then feeds right into the nomenclatural terms, right? Highlight, light light, middle light, dark light, halftone, light shadow, middle shadow, dark shadow, accent. Where the front, top, side, left planes are, right? The largest planes that are turning toward the light, that is where my light, and highlight modeling factors are. Where the front planes are, the gradations in the light, that's where my middle lights and dark lights are occurring. And of course, in my underside right planes, turning away from the light completely, that's where all my shadow modeling factors are. Middle shadow, or light shadow, middle shadow, dark shadow. So the modeling factors, nomenclatural expression of form, modeling factors are planar orientations, just like the spatial description, but they are describing not what is turning toward and away from me, they're describing the planes as they turn toward and away from the light. So, modeling factors, I have a very quick understanding then based on my spatial description. Light lights, middle lights, dark lights, right, around the shadow mass. In the shadow, dark shadows, always right next to the shadow boundary. Middle shadow, those general areas of shadow, and then areas of light shadow, the areas that are picking up the most amount of reflected light. And of course, in this case, because we don't have this thing just suspended, I mean like free form, like the bowling pin and the sphere were, we have a large cast shadow, right? There are two types of shadows that we have to deal with, form and cast. Form shadows are the shadows on the object where the form turns away from the light. Those are called form shadows. On the object where the actual form itself is turning away from the incident or the direct light. Those are form shadows. Cast shadows are where something is stopping light from hitting another area. This area of shadow here is not dark. It's not a shadow because it's turning away from the source of light. It's a shadow because this object is blocking it. And of course, we can have cast shadows even on the object. The shadow right here. This isn't where the chin is turning away from the light. It's where the lip is blocking light from hitting it. Right here, under the top of the lip. This is a form shadow. This is where the shadow of the lip is turning away from the light, and then it is casting a shadow on the lower lip. This area of shadow, the cast shadow, is where the light is being blocked by the upper lip. So we have two types of shadows, form and cast. Cast shadows are made up of two parts. We have the umbra, which is the darker part of the shadow, and the penumbra, which is the loosely used term halftone or transition from the umbra to the direct light, right? That's that smoky transition area on the outside. Umbra, penumbra. We're even getting some, I've got another window on the left side of the studio that I didn't cover. I'm getting some contamination here. I've got some window light coming in, so I'm going to have to focus past that. That's causing that double cast shadow here. So, so in this painting, then, I have to deal with both form and cast shadows. So I've taken a second to analyze my setup. I know from painting this that I have a 5 value background. The cast is a 7. I know the two locals I'm dealing with. I know I keep mentioning to you Obviously, in the context of your own your own projects, you're going to have to determine the locals that are in front of you. And certainly any situation, if I were just to randomly set up objects in front of me, I wouldn't know what the local values are. I'd have to take a moment to determine what those locals are. That will give me a sense of the overall value range, and I can start from there. So we're ready to go. Paints are out. I've done a little bit of analyzation. Time to get into the painting. So, reminder, step one, background, right? The environment. And in this case, unlike with the previous cases, with the other two projects, the 5 background, I just flattened it for the sake of ease for the projects. This, I'm going to go ahead, when I do the background, and what I do under normal circumstances certainly, is I'm going to gradate the background as I put it in. It's painted a 5, but that doesn't mean that it's just a flat 5 value. I mean, that plane is getting hit by a light source, which means it is gradating. Some areas are going to be lighter than a 5. In this case, it's down here. Some areas are going to be slightly darker than a 5. So it's 5 plus or minus. It's around that, but it's not just a flat 5. All planes, including flat planes, gradate. All of them. No matter how slight, they gradate. So, make a decision. I'm going to go 5 plus for the background. Or at least in this side, I'm starting with the lightest side. And of course, I can take my isolation cards, right? If you remember, the isolation cards. I'm going to lean out a little bit. I'm sorry, my big head's going to get in the way. I flap the isolation card so it's casting a shadow, so it creates at least something that's near black. I hold the hole, the punched hole of the isolation card in front of the area that I'm checking. Close one eye, and then I hold the other isolation card, right, flapped, looking through the hole, in front of the area that I'm checking, that I've painted and I want to check. So it gives me the ability to scan back and forth quickly to look at the value that's in that hole to check and see if I'm in the right location on the value scale. It looks like I can come up a little bit higher in value. Very important, these first few steps, that you take some time to check your determinations. Because other steps that I take are going to be based off of this initial determination. 1 second, let me move my microphone back a little bit. There we go. Okay. So I lightened that a little bit. That's good. And it darkens from there. From a 5.5. And I can see it gradates from lighter to darker as it moves across the background. So step one, background. I'd mentioned, I think with the last video, at some point we're going to go over the brush marks, types of brush marks. We've gone over the application methods, right? Paint application methods being mosaic and couch. And we've gone over some blending, the 2 blending directions, which are parallel and perpendicular. I think on the next video, I will take a moment and talk about the types of brush marks. The one I'm using right now is called smearing. We'll get into it later. I'll just throw it out there as a teaser. The 3 types of brush marks are smearing, stroking, and stippling. We'll get into it. Oh, I think my paint's starting to set up. I'm seeing some skin form. I'll have to remix my palette soon. I go. I say again. You notice, right? I dip in the medium. I do not scoop the paint. I draw from the side to make sure I'm getting a controlled amount of paint. And complete. Once I do this, the paint consistency I'm looking for is thin, opaque. Thick enough to cover, thin enough to make or to modify, to change. I'm getting glare. That's a little dark. Checking the upper left-hand side, I overdid it just a little bit too much. I went all the way down to a 4. It should be a 5 minus, maybe a 4.5. Lighten this up just a little bit. Now I'm just going in there and couching a 5 directly into that 4. Remember, when you're couching, then everything's going to start to mix together. So instead of a 4, when I couch a 5 into it, I'm going to get a value in between. And again, the glare is, it's good. Glare is doing it to me. Regrettably, anytime you work on a toothy surface, any type of canvas, unless it's really smooth, you're going to have to deal with glare at some point. Glare is caused by, I'm going to lighten this up just a touch. Glare is caused by light bouncing off the tooth of the surface. I certainly don't want to make it any worse. This is also why the paint consistency gets very important. If I just grab the toothpaste consistency off my palette without any medium, the consistency will be so thick, guaranteed, that when I stroke the paint, it's going to leave ridges of that oil, which will pick up the light and create even more glare. So the other good thing about adding some medium and making this more creamy is you're at least minimizing the amount of glare you might otherwise get. The way to fix that, if you are getting glare, is delicately pull the brush in the direction of the light, because again, what's causing glare with the thick paint is if I stroke the paint in this direction at a right angle to the light source, it's creating ridges that are then getting hit by the light that's at a right angle. So if I take some time to stroke the paint in the direction of the light, I'm getting rid of those ridges and getting rid of the glare. So, I have my background in. Now to my, what? Step 1, background. Step 2, middle shadow. Now in this case, I don't just have one set of shadows to deal with, I have 2. And they are 2 separate values. I have a shadow here that I have to posterize, flatten, simplify. I have a shadow here that I have to simplify. And they're not the same value. Why are they not the same value? Because the local value of the background is darker than the local value of the cast, which means that the shadows, of course, are going to be slightly different in their nature. The 5 value background is going to have a shadow that is slightly darker than the 7 value cast. So, starting with a middle shadow, I'm going to try to average the shadows on the Umbra. I'm getting a double cast shadow, which I'm going to ignore. Help me ignore it because it's an irritation, and since I'm the designer and I'm making the painting, I can get rid of it if I want to. So, a reminder, if you have any trouble reading your values, that's why you keep your value scale handy. I can hold it up in front of the thing that I'm painting, squint, move back and forth, looking for what is called passage. Passage is when the value at the edge of the thing you're checking, or this object, when the value at the edge of this bleeds into the value that's behind it, it tells me that the values are the same or similar. That is called passage. You're literally creating a passage between two separate areas because their values are so similar. So I can hold up my value scale in front of me to get a starting point. Somewhere around a 1 or 2 in value, very dark. I can also go with my palette knife, get a little bit of the paint that I think, the value that I think is up there, get it on my palette knife, and hold it up in front of the area in question. And squint, and I should see that passage. So I mixed a 1.5, and I'm holding the palette knife up vertically in front of this area, squinting and seeing if it matches. It's pretty close. Certainly it matches more down here, so I'm going to run with that. I always have time to modify. I'm looking for an average that's not the lightest and not the darkest. And actually, I should have been taking the read from down here anyway, because this is the darkest part of the cast shadow. The lightest part of the cast shadow is here, so I should have been actually looking in the middle section anyway for an overall average. Because if you remember, I'm going to mosaic the lights and couch the shadows. So I'm going to keep these shadows simple. I will get into them later. I'm just looking to get a value down that I can work into. Again, bear with me with the cast shadow. I could even couch that in later if I so desire, or I can focus past it. There's always something with these when I'm filming. Always something. Either the heater goes on and there's ambient noise, or I got light coming in. Always a pain. Yeah, that's good. Overall, that's a good average value, plus or minus. I can see areas that need to be lightened. I can see areas that need to be darkened. But it's a good starting point. Now, I mentioned the two parts of the cast shadow are the umbra, the darker part, and the penumbra, which is the softer transition on the outside edge. It really, whether or not you put the penumbra in as its own separate value or not, is really dependent on how large it is. Under most circumstances with small objects on tabletops, if you're doing a still life, once you put the umbra in, with a little parallel blending, you can create the penumbra. However, the larger, in this case, I've got a large umbra. The penumbra really flares open. I think I'm actually going to have to deal with the penumbra as its own separate thing and put it in, because I don't think I'm going to be able to successfully blend for it and keep control of it, especially the areas in here where it really flares out. So, what is its value? Don't know, but I do know that it's somewhere between the value of the background and the 2 value that I already put in, so I'll just grab a 3 as a starting point. Again, can always modify. In all the years I've been teaching, it seems like it's the most common problem is people are afraid to put paint down as if they can't adjust it. That's the beauty of paint. It's particularly oil. It's the lazy man's medium. When you're dealing with watercolor, there's only so much you can rework something before you destroy the paper. With oil, it's lazy man's medium, just like acrylic. I could keep working on this, making adjustments all day long, weeks at a time if I needed to get it right. So no fear. If what I put down is not correct or needs adjustment, I will adjust it when the time comes. So get a little penumbra in there. Hit just a little bit of parallel blending since I'm here. Pardon me. Get these areas working together. I do not want to do perpendicular in this case first because it will destroy the boundary. I might have to do a little bit of it later to get it really smoothed out, but for now, a little parallel blending gets it working. So I did the middle shadow of the cast shadow. Now I want to do the middle shadow of the form and cast shadow on the object. It's going to be slightly lighter than this. Why? Because it's a lighter local value. When I squint until my eyes are almost closed, because I can see all kinds of gradations and reflected lights in there, I don't want to paint any of those right now. I'm looking for the middle, the average shadow value that I see when I squint until my eyes are almost closed. And it's not much lighter than the cast shadow here. Put a little spot down. Check with my isolation cards. I can actually be a little bit more. I started with a 3 because I was using a 3 on the other 7 value locals. This actually looks like it's just a tad darker. But I'm not going to go too dark because I know I've got to get some light shadows in there as well. Get my noggin out of the way. And fill. Simple, simple posterization. Plenty of time to make adjustments, no fear. What do they say in the book Dune, right? The Bene Gesserit saying, fear is the mind killer. No fear. So, pardon me, light shadow, middle shadow, dark shadow have now been combined into one average middle shadow. There's an underplane here I'm going to get later. I can see there's a lot of reflected light coming in, but I have time for that. I don't want to get caught in the shadows. I'm couching the shadows, if you remember. Why do I do something different in the lights, in the shadow as opposed to the light? Why am I couching? Why do I couch the shadows but mosaic the light? Because the shadows are receiving less light, right? All shadows are reflected lights, which means it's regular incident light that's bouncing from the surrounding material into the shadows. It's all reflected light. The value range is much closer. So it's much easier to get these subtle value changes in by couching than having to mosaic a 3, a 3 plus, a 3 minus, and try to keep them next to each other. Much easier to couch them in. So I got my middle shadows in, right? And that included the cast shadow. So background, middle shadows, then lights, right? All the way up at the other end. When I squint, no problem seeing the lights. None at all. And I already rehearsed it, right? The idea of taking that time, thinking through it spatially, nomenclaturally, taking that little time to analyze this before I paint so that when the brush goes down, I am confident that the paint is going in the right area. Of course, this is simplified. Got the front top side left plane here. Front top side left plane on the lip. I mentioned earlier that's where the lightest lights are. Front top a little bit right there. I probably should have held off on that. I could have couched that in. Front top side left plane on the chin. Ball of the chin. Right, these are all the planes that are turning. Front, top, side, left. All the planes that are turning into the light the most. And even the top plane here is certainly turning towards the light. I can see a gradation up there, but I'm trying to keep it simple. Keep it simple. We won't even add the stupid on the end of that, right? Not stupid. No keep it simple stupid, just keep it simple. Kiss with one S. There's plenty of time to gradate and create the gradations. We're trying to take this complex form and simplify it into 3 values, right? We're trying to, with the modeling factors in this initial lay-in of paint, get the least, or at least, I'm sorry, the minimum amount of value changes I know I need to create a gradation, which is 3. Now that brings to the discussion, which now we're in a more complex object, so we can actually have this talk. There are 3 stages of a painting: fill, form, finish. The fill layer is what I'm doing right now. I have a line drawing. I am filling. I'm pouring my initial set of values into this to cover the form, right? The fill layer, a completed fill layer, is when I have the entire form in just the amount of values I need to make a simple gradation. The fill layer is when I have all modeling factors in, right? When all modeling factors are in: light, light, middle light, dark light, light shadow, middle shadow, dark shadow, halftone, accent, highlight. When all of those values or changes are in, those are the least amount of changes I need to make form. That's the fill layer. I'm trying to track or create or put in quickly and broadly how light spills across the entire form. So I get a sense of the overall value structure. That's the fill layer. Forming and finishing is when I go into that initial layer and slow down and get all of the little forms and gradations and eventually colors, hues and chromas, all of the areas that I smoothed out and bypassed with this initial fill when I was looking to get light across the whole thing. So with this fill layer, this initial fill layer, I'm just looking to get the modeling factors necessary in the light and shadow to make the form turn. So I went from background to middle shadows to light lights, from light lights to dark lights. And why to dark lights? Because just like the light lights and the shadows, dark lights are easy to spot. A dark light is always, always, always next to the shadow boundary. Now, how thick or thin is it? Well, I have to make that determination. What is its tonal value? Well, there again, I have to determine that. But I at least know where it's located. That I do know. I made a little judgment error here. I should not have taken the light right up to the shadow in this area because it pinches out or doesn't allow me to put my dark light modeling factor in. And obviously the more complicated the form gets, the more difficult sometimes it gets to determine where these value breaks are. I'm going to, all of this is a front side right. I'm going to put this entire area in as a dark light, except for right here, because instead of a front side right plane, it becomes a front plane. I will leave that for my middle light. Got a little bit of a dark light over here, dark light between the lips. So the dark light in this lighting situation, all of the front side right and front underplanes are dark lights. Thread a little bit of a dark light in here, which acts actually as the penumbra. I'm not going to worry about it here because it's too small. So I have background, middle shadow, light lights, dark lights. If you remember from our conversation, whatever isn't a light light or a dark light, by default, is a middle light. So I'm just going to expand the light light on the lip over here a little bit more. Whatever is not dark light or light light is middle light. And the middle light is where, under most circumstances, I am best able to perceive the actual local of the object. In this case, it is a 7. Now, I know from, again, experience teaching, the most disconcerting thing about this process for most of my students is you are intentionally bypassing detail, surface detail. And it takes training to be able to do that. There are a number of gradations in these areas, small forms and gradations that I am simplifying. As I look for unity, I shouldn't say unity, as I look to put the proper values, or the values in here that will turn form across the entire object. It takes some doing to get yourself used to that process. I am going to go back, as I said, we add the idea of these painting stages. I am going to, in the forming and finishing stages, the next two stages, I'm going to go back into each one of these areas, and I am going to model further. I'm going to add the little details that I am simplifying right now. But for now, we want broad and loose and simple. Right? I'm sure most of you, if you've been around painting or drawing, the maxim is general to specific. I'm not going to start with details. I don't start building a house by putting the curtain rods up. I've got to get a foundation down. Well, this is our foundation, our value foundation. Get my lights in. I have to pop some transitions in here. Or pop some of these lights up just a little bit higher. Oh, should have taken that dark light. Bad Neil, bad Neil. My students, studio students are probably looking and saying, you didn't put a dark light there. You went right from middle light to dark light. Naughty, naughty. What can I say? I'm just going to pop some of these lights up just a hair. I think I pitched them just a hair low in some situations, some places. So I'm not getting the read of the value. It should be popping a little bit more. So the other nice thing about doing this fill layer is because it's fast and broad, I can quickly, even though it's simple, I should quickly get once I get this in, I should get the same sense of form, even though in a simplified manner, as I'm seeing in front of me. I mean, I should, when I squint, start to see the same overall broad flow of light. If not, I can stop and make adjustments to the modeling factors right now before I go any further. I'm going to have to go darker with some of these areas and lighter, but this, as far as a starting point, I think I'm okay. So basically, it's a paint by numbers. If you haven't figured it out from the other demos, this is really kind of a paint by number. The only difference is I'm setting the numbers. Clean up the background a little bit. Just while I'm here, softening edges in the light, so I don't have my line drawing poking through. And then get blending, right? If we remember the procedure. Light, light, middle light, dark light. Or light, light, dark light, middle light, then blend. If you remember, parallel and perpendicular. When I'm out in the form and I'm trying to make broad transitions, I'm doing a perpendicular blend, right? Pulling paint into paint. Create broad transitions. When I get close to an area where I need the drawing to maintain its accuracy, like along the edge here, I will do a parallel blend. I'm definitely going to have to hit that upper lip darker, but as I said, it's okay. Plenty of time here. I can see there are things popping out into the light over here. I'm just getting the overall transitions. Light moving across form. In fact, that's what the fill layer, right? I'm getting light as it moves across form. So I'm getting the light on the form across the whole form resolved. Forming and finishing is when I go into each area and model the forms in the light. So the first thing is light across form, then moving into each area and getting the forms in the light. Simple. And a little bit of parallel blending for my... So once the lights are blended, then with either parallel or perpendicular, depending on what it requires, blend for my halftone. And then I'll be ready to couch in my lights. Or sorry, whoop, couch in my shadows. That's what I meant. Trying to speed up a little bit here. I'm afraid my camera battery might be getting low. So I'll try to pick up the pace here, at least get this blended. Okay, so, oh, a little bit more right here. That is a hard break though, where the philtrum is that gully right under the nose. That's the philtrum right in there. Soften that up just a little bit. It's always better to have a softer edge to begin with than a harder edge. It's much easier to soften edges while they're wet than when they're dry. So get in the habit of softening edges as you go. You can always firm them up later. So I got the light, light, dark, light, middle light, blend, halftone, blended. Now last bit, or I say next bit, is the gradations in the shadow. Right? The gradations in the shadow, if I started with a middle, now I want to move to my darker shadows and lighter shadows to complete the three. Darker shadow, that's actually a cast shadow. There's a slightly darker shadow right under the lip. If you remember, the darkest shadows are always right next to the shadow boundary, right? That core shadow. It's also called, this is one of my training in college, the zone of tangency. It's the area just beyond where light is tangent or touching the form in one place. And it's the area receiving the least amount of reflected light. Let's go a little bit darker. That's where the couching gets tricky. As I've mentioned one time before, multiple times before, when you're painting wet into wet, sometimes you have to actually overdo the value to get it to all mix together properly. Oof, too dark. Dark shadow along the edge of the shadow shape up there. The shadow boundary here. I'll probably have to retouch the shadow boundary. I'm sorry, the halftone a little bit. Dark shadows and light shadows, and it's probably difficult to see some of this shadow work. It's really subtle. The values are really subtle. I don't know if you're able to see on the camera some of the minor adjustments that I'm making, but I am making them. Dark shadow and light shadow. Like I'd mentioned before, there's a really strong amount of reflected light coming on the underplane, or along this underplane. Obviously, it's getting it from the tabletop. And not only gradations, do a little bit of cleanup here of the shapes of the shadow mask while I'm at it. Blending. Cleanup. And then, so I've addressed not only the some contamination on there. I've addressed the light, light, middle light, dark light in the form shadow, and even the cast shadows up here. Because the cast shadow here on the background is large enough, I can actually treat it very similarly and add the same language to adhere to the rule of 3. Instead of a light, light, middle light, and dark light, I can have a dark umbra, middle umbra, and light umbra. Oops, sorry, let me get out of the way. The darkest part of the rules regarding cast shadows. The darkest part of the cast shadow is the area that is right next to the thing that's casting it, right? The closer you get to the cast shadow, the darker the cast shadow gets. So the closer you get to the object casting the shadow, the darker the value, the smaller the penumbra, and the sharper the edge of both umbra and penumbra, right? The closer we get, darker cast shadow, smaller penumbra, firmer the edge. As you move away from the object casting it, the cast shadow gets lighter, the edges get softer, the penumbra gets wider. So in putting the gradations in the cast shadow, I know this upper corner is definitely going to be the darkest part of the umbra. Darker here up against the object, and as it goes, so the darker areas are up against the object, the lighter areas of the umbra are down here as it moves away. As I said, I'm not counting at this point the double cast shadow that's occurring because of the open window. I'm just lightening because I know, because of the rule of 3, that it has to get lighter, period. So I have background, shadows, middle shadows, light lights, dark lights, middle lights, blend, halftones, either blend or state, couch in, light shadows, dark shadows. Last order of business are the extremes, highlights and accents. In this case, highlights, right, are the lighter areas. Now this isn't a glossy object, but I can see in the light areas where the value gets even higher because of the orientation of the volume towards the light. So in something that is a matte object like this, the highlights are just a slight bump up in value from what's already in the light. There's actually a highlight running right along that edge too. It's always tricky too with the higher values to couch in these divisions because of how easily everything starts to just mix together. some thicker paint on here to get that. I'm going to hold off right now. I'll be able to do more work with that. And you probably can't even see it anyway, the adjustments. So highlights and accents. In this case, the accents really, those darkest areas, really around because there are no holes or pits in here. The accents are where the cast shadow, the object is touching the background more than anything. These small areas where it gets really dark. And that's it. That is a completed fill layer in the fill, form, and finish type of working process. Now, I'm going to spend a little time, right? I mean, it's not that easy. It's not that neat and clean. I got everything in, but now I'm going to go through and do some light blending here or there just to get these things actually working together a little bit more. Some of these transitions are a little choppy between modeling factors. Gives me an opportunity to clean up the drawing in some areas as well, where I think I lost it just a little bit. I normally, if I were working on my own projects, would not be working this fast. I can certainly do these things quickly, but I'm speeding up. I'm putting the pedal to the metal for demo purposes. So I don't know about any of you, but I know after about 20-30 minutes of talking, I start to zone out, which is why I'm trying to keep these short and bite-sized, but there's a lot of information to cover. A little bit of cleanup on the drawing. So as I said, this is a start. This is where we begin. And it's going to take some doing to get used to the abstract quality of this fill layer and be comfortable with it and be able to envision where it's going once you get into each one of these areas and work them, to finish them, to complete them. It's going to take some doing. It took me a while. It takes my students a while. We're all used to getting in and picking at details when we start. And there are some people that actually paint that way and they do it successfully. That's not the way we do it here at the Carlin Academy. We start with a simplified, right, this fill layer, which is a simple, broad interpretation of the form as light passes across the entire thing, and then we get into details, knowing that we have a good foundation. We're working on a good foundation. Because we have time in this fill layer to make modifications, right? If some of my initial values, the modeling factors were put in at the wrong tonal value, or if the modeling factors themselves are too large or too small, I have time in this very simplified manner, in this very simplified stage, to make adjustments without committing to a whole lot of details that I then have to make correct if they're not at the right value or they're in the wrong place. That's the beauty of starting simply, or starting with that idea of general to specific. I'm not spending a whole lot of time committing to details that could be in the wrong place or the wrong value. A little bit of drawing over here. I'll make a few more modifications and then we'll call it a day. So I will leave this then. We'll consider this part 1, where I've put the fill layer in. Part 2 will be where I do the forming and finishing to bring this to completion. Just a little bit more. Oh, sorry, my head's in the way. Should have some type of an alarm bell that tells me when my big noggin is in the way. Push this shadow boundary down just a little bit. It's coming up too high. A little parallel and perpendicular. Big penumbra right there. Now, I think you noticed if you've been watching, I'm not really adding any new paint here. I'm just taking the existing paint and pushing it around. I'm being a paint bully. Just pushing around what's already here. Oop. The only thing I'm doing is periodically drying the tip of my brush off so that I don't get any heavy-duty contamination from one area to the other. A little bit more, and then I'm going to call it quits. As I said, we'll get back into this, the next video, with forming and finishing. So again, repetition. There are 3 stages of the painting: fill, form, and finish. The fill stage is when you are getting in all of your modeling factors, which gives you the minimum amount of value changes to make form in the light and in the shadow. That is the fill layer. Forming and finishing is when you're going into that, whether couching if it's still wet or going back into it after it's dry, and adding all the little forms in that you simplified and bypassed in this simplification. Right? Fill is about painting the light on form. Forming and finishing is when you slow down to paint the form in the light. Simple. A little bit more. Now the problem is, see, I want to keep these short, but now of course I get in here, as you guys probably all know who've painted, I could keep picking at this all day. Or I'm just dying to actually get into the next stage, but I'm going to have to close it down here. A little bit more blending on the penumbra, and that should do it for the time being. So we're going to hold there. We got our fill layer in, all modeling factors put in: highlight, light light, middle light, dark light, halftone, light shadow, middle shadow, dark shadow, and accent. And that's it. Okay, gang, that will do it for today. Like I said, step 2 or part 2, we will get into the second and third stages of the painting, forming and finishing. For now, that's it. Ciao. See you soon. Like and subscribe. I have to keep reminding myself to say that. And of course, as always, leave any comments or questions in the comment section. Have a great day. See you soon.